Welcome to Quantum RX, the podcast that teaches you how to move beyond stuck emotions and trauma for mind, body, and spirit healing. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Davis. Today, we're going to be talking about emotions because emotions are something we encounter and have minute to minute on a daily basis. And most of us struggle with, naming them and what they actually are and moving through them. And that's where we get into trouble. When we have an emotion and we either suppress it, repress it, ignore it, you have to acknowledge an emotion in order to process it and not store it. And many of you know that I have a stored emotions and trauma quiz. And one of the reasons I designed it was so that people could see on paper or their computer, why, what happens when we don't handle our emotions. So that was one of the main reasons I created that. And I continue to develop it over time as I do this work with people and I see new things come to light. But today we are going to talk about what are emotions, how do I learn how to feel them, what they mean, and why they are so important, and an exercise that you can do to help yourself start to identify, move through, and process some of your emotions. If you're curious as to if you have any stored emotions or trauma that might be causing your illness, preventing you from achieving your goals, or even just showing up as the best, most authentic version of yourself, I invite you to take my free stored emotions and trauma quiz. You will find that link in the show notes. So let's get into it. What exactly are emotions? One of the working definitions, and I will say if you Google it, you'll find lots of definitions out there. Emotions are conscious mental reactions such as anger, sadness, or fear, subjectively experienced as strong feelings, usually directed toward a specific object or person, and typically accompanied by physiological and behavioral changes in the body. That is super important to understand because it really ties in and integrates all of the work that I do. It is a conscious mental reaction. That's the first part that's really important to identify. It is something that your frontal lobe is consciously creating. It's not necessarily, it's driven by the subconscious, but your subconscious isn't shouting out saying, hey, this, be angry. It is literally what is like in your frontal lobe and kind of the seeds of your personality and identity fuel most of your emotions and conscious reactions. So that's the first part to break down that's really important. Second part, subjectively experienced as strong feelings. Subjectively means it is you. You are the one who is feeling it, and your thoughts around it are subjective versus being objective. And objectivity means that you are not necessarily judging something. You're allowing it to be what it is. And that's what we need to shift to. We need to shift from subjectivity to a little more objectivity when we're handling our emotions. And I'll describe that a little bit later on. But the part where it says, and I will also say this about subjectivity or subjectively, as it says in the definition, that's how you view it. And if somebody else is watching you or, in an interaction with you, their reaction is also subjective. And I think that's an important piece to distinguish, that there's subjectivity in both our, judgment and thoughts and feelings, and then the other person's as well, if this is happening in a dynamic situation. But it says subjectively experienced as strong feelings, usually directed at a specific object. Strong feelings. So when I'm doing the work with somebody, we talk about emotions. We talk about the importance of them, what exactly they are. What is this? If this person can define what this emotion is, but we go after the feeling. We go after the body feeling, because if an emotion is not processed and moved through, you will store it as a body feeling. And that's when we say a holographic manipulation therapy, which is one of the main modalities that I use. It's stored as a little hologram in the body. That is what we go after in the work specifically. There are different people will label it different ways, but the process that I use, we label it as a hologram. I've heard other people label that stored feeling in other ways. So I just also want to say that it might exist in different terminology as well. And the last part of the definition, it's typically accompanied by physiological and behavioral changes in the body. And we've talked about this stuff a lot, those physiological changes that come. So, you might have had that first, trauma and experience certain emotions. If you did not process them, that change that you felt in that moment of trauma will stay with you, and it will grow bigger and bigger and bigger. Like we've talked about before, the law of compounding, your brain is always looking for similar situations, not even the same situation, but similar situations, and adding to that original hologram or stored emotion in your body. And it will get bigger and bigger and snowball over time if you do not address it. So it will result in physiological changes. And we've talked about this. Again, the stored emotions and trauma quiz really highlights this from the standpoint of you are going to have all sorts of different kinds of symptoms. So for some people, it's very physical. It could be really tight muscles, tight shoulders, headaches, headaches, especially in the back of your head. For other people, it's going to manifest as autoimmunity or even any kind of chronic condition, because we've talked about this before. Digestive difficulties, those are some of the most common, where people either have loose stools or diarrhea or constipation, and it's labeled IBS. I will say IBS is BS. I've thought this, my entire career, because I've known that IBS is typically a label given to you when the person you're seeing does not understand what's actually going on. We do know that IBS is typically some kind of imbalance in the gut deriving from many different sources. And I'm not going to get into that right now. But the underlying mechanism of those physiological changes that cause that imbalance in the gut are repressed and suppressed emotions, trauma, and all sorts of feelings that have not been processed. I will say this, that I firmly believe this, because most people realize when they're in the process of trauma or anxiety or anything like that, they feel it. They feel it in their gut. There's a reason you feel that in your gut. So much of it does manifest as GI symptoms, but GI symptoms set the stage for autoimmunity and a lot of other chronic conditions. So, what we see and what we notice and what our body is using symptomatically to tell us that there are issues are, these musculoskeletal things and these, labeled conditions that we've been given over the years that we really need to address. And to address them, you need to address those suppressed and repressed emotions and those body feelings that are going on. So that's in the work that I do. That is exactly what we're going after. And I thought that definition of emotions really highlighted my process. And I know that obviously interpretation is different for everybody. But when I saw that, I had one of those light bulb moments and I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what we're going after in the work that we do. And so emotions in and of themselves, I think most people really understand and can feel the nuance of basic emotion. Like they know when they're angry, they know when they're sad, they know, I would say fear, but there are some people who don't understand the difference between fear and other emotions. A lot of times there's a blurriness and an overlap, but if you go online, you'll see there are many different, I want to say categories. They'll call them categories of emotions. You'll see 20, 30, sometimes 40. I believe that there are many, many, many different emotions, and there is some blurred lines between the different emotions. But looking at some of those lists and really understanding if you know what you're feeling when you feel something is important. So, one of the books that I've been recommending for a very long time, let me see, how old is my daughter is 7. So I've been recommending this book probably for 6 or 7 years because I remember when I met this person, I met her at a mastermind event for functional medicine, integrated medicine, health group, like, just naturally minded or integratively minded healthcare practitioners. It was an event and was she a speaker? I've gone to this event multiple times. I don't remember if she was a speaker, but I think she was, which is why I became aware of her book. But the book is, I'm trying to see if I have it around me. It's 90 Seconds to the Life You Love by Dr. Joan Rosenberg. And that one was really important for me because I read through it and she teaches you how to feel an emotion and label it and then move through it. Because let me see here. I'm going to see if I can find here. Yep, I'll tell you. It's like the book shows you how to master your difficult emotions and cultivate the positive ones that help you achieve calm and balance and happiness in your life. It really is important. And it's based on, just like the work that I do, neuroscience research. And it's got aspects of things like clinical psychology and mindfulness in it, but it's a pretty quick read. It really teaches you how to just identify emotions, move through them, and just not be a slave, not be shackled to your emotions and letting your emotions control you all the time. It's a great segue into this type of work. I really, really liked it. And I've been recommending it for years and I still recommend it to this day. Another one that I will recommend that's kind of another piece of the puzzle to this is The Body Keeps the Score. And so many people have heard of this, by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. His work was pretty pivotal for me as well. I've had this book for a very, very long time, just understanding how the body stores trauma. So that's another one for you to check out if you are interested in these realms. And so another resource that you could find online, if you go Google like emotions wheel or feelings wheel, there are charts out there also that will help you kind of label emotions and feelings. And I use those with the kids that I work with. But I will tell you, they're just as useful for adults because so many of us have gone through life ignoring our emotions and just, shoving them down, pushing them away. So that's a really important piece of the puzzle too. But especially for if you are trying to work on yourself, just really getting clear on what is it that I'm feeling? What does it mean? And how can I move through it? And so that's the next piece of this puzzle is identifying that emotion. Are you clear on what you're feeling? So let's use shame. Shame's a good example. If you are feeling shame, somebody says something to you and then you automatically have this feeling. What is that feeling? You identify it as shame. And you could say to yourself, and this is something I would encourage you to not do in the moment, but to sit down with afterwards, either with a piece of paper or a journal and say, what was I feeling? Identifying that feeling. We're using shame in this example. Shame. What does that really mean to me? So when you feel that shame, what is it really signifying? It's usually signifying that you're judging yourself. You're not good enough. You're not worthy. I'm, not deserving. I'm just a lot of people when we talk about shame just say like, I'm not good enough. I've not done the things in life that I want to do. I know what I need to do, but I can't make myself do it. I feel like I'm letting other people down. I feel like I'm letting myself down. These are the thoughts and feelings and ideas that are conjured with shame. So, like I said before, identify it as shame. What does it actually mean to you personally? And then what does it, the reality of it? What does it actually mean? The absolute truth of it. First of all, it's okay. It's okay to feel that shame. It is really, really important to acknowledge that because we have deemed emotions and feelings negative over time. And that's usually something we were taught as children. A lot of us were taught it's not okay to cry. If you want to cry, I'll give you something to cry about. We were all told these things, or boys don't cry, or girls shouldn't cry. There's so many things that we were told. It's not okay to feel anger or feel rage or show your sadness. There's so many things that most of us were taught when we were children, mostly because of two things. Our parents weren't taught how to deal with them themselves. And so when our parents saw us having this emotion, it made them uncomfortable, and that's how they responded. So those are the reasons why that we were, told these things. And again, like I said, I've said in the past, no judgment on them. That's what they were given from their parents and societally. So we need to work on addressing what we can address now. And what we can address is how we see and respond to our emotions that are so important and so precious. I really want to emphasize that all feelings and emotions are valid, important, and really, just like I said, they are precious. They are something we've lived with forever. Over time, we've gotten to a place where they have been labeled negative or positive. I would tell you that we need to sit with them in, no judgment. That's what we're going to get to next, how to actually deal with them. But yeah, just being objective. I told you I would get back to that objectivity, just sitting with it, like just in an objective, non-judging fashion, and letting that feeling be and moving through it. Because most of the time you'll find that when you do that, that feeling isn't as big or, as overwhelming as you might think it is. And as you do this over time, it'll become less and less and less. And so I wanted to mention that. But when you sit there and you're like, what is the actual reality and pure absolute truth of a feeling? All of them are okay and good to feel, valid to feel. But that shame it's a judgment on yourself. It's you. And the truth is, you don't deserve that judgment. You do deserve love. You do deserve all of the things you don't think you deserve. So that's what the absolute truth of it is. So those are kind of the steps that I move people through. What is the emotion? How does it, what does it mean to you, or how does it make you like really feel on the inside? And then what's the absolute truth? Those are some steps that you can use. Then I tell people the way to work with it is to sit with it. We're still using shame as the example. So you've identified it as shame. You sit with the shame and you just let it be. Sit there with it like a non-judgmental friend that you're just supporting, and allow it to be there, because for so long we've pushed these feelings away, and we have pushed them away, or we've pushed them down, or flat out ignored them. And we all know that that ends up in not great places. And so once you sit there and you sit with it for 3, 5, 10 minutes, you'll realize that it's not as hard and big and scary as we think it is or feel it will be. It's like that anxiety towards feeling the emotion. But when you actually sit with the emotion, which if you listened to the episode last week, I was talking about grief and growth. And I realized that when I was having a moment of one of the interactions that I had had with somebody, because they saw my self growth as a threat and they responded to me in a really negative way, I kind of felt attacked. And when I was sat down with my feelings, I was like, well, I feel sad because I'm sad that they did that to me and it hurt, but I'm sad that they're in a space where they felt like they had to be that way. I felt compassion for the person too, because I knew that it was something about them and not about me. There were lots of things that came up with it. But when I sat with that sadness, normally I would say past versions of me, like versions of me probably 2 years ago, as early as 2 years ago, would have been like, "Oh, this is sadness. I don't want to feel this. I only like feeling positive emotions." And so I would have probably sidestepped it. I would have probably acknowledged it, but I would have sidestepped it. And then I ended up having my year of grief last year. My year of grief and transformation, where I cried a lot. I cried a lot last year. And it was processing all of these things that I hadn't let go over years, like decades. And so, in things that I thought I had processed because I cried for like a minute or a day, but didn't fully process. So I sat with that sadness. And as I sat with the sadness, it wasn't horrible. You come to feel it as kind of I don't want to say a friend, but a friend. It's like a friend. It's like something that you know is there. It's there to serve you. But, by acknowledging it and saying, like, you're literally saying to that emotion, I see you, it allows it to dissipate and it doesn't get stored in your body. And the one thing I'm going to leave you with at the end is we've talked about what the emotions are, how you can learn to identify them, feeling them and allowing them to be, and then sitting with them. The last thing that I want to leave you with is if you do have deeper things, like there is a trauma attached to a certain emotion, then that's when you really need to do the deeper work, because that's what I was just speaking about with myself. Like, I realized that even though I had done a lot of trauma work in my life, there were still certain emotions that were attached to traumas that were little nuggets of big traumas that I didn't deal with. So it was really funny how that came into my awareness. It was like there were big things that I had dealt with, like multiple miscarriages and loss of relationships or loved ones, or some of the other big traumas that I had dealt with. Just some deep feelings of not feeling good enough. But it was funny because I had done some big trauma sessions on these and I was like, oh, I'm good to go. But then last year, it was really interesting how 2024, it was like little nuggets were sprinkled to me all throughout the year, where I realized, and I didn't get this until literally the end of the year. It was probably October, November when I realized, oh, these things were being, shown to me because there were still aspects of these traumas that I needed to deal with. And so that's another important thing to acknowledge, that any emotions that are tied to a big trauma that you haven't dealt with, you might need to deal with that, or I should say you do need to deal with that. But you might have dealt with a trauma and had little pieces that had an emotion tied to it that you did not fully work through. And that might come up because you might find that you might get triggered. And then if you sit with what that is, you might find that the reason why. Sometimes we don't. Like, sometimes when I'm doing this work, I just know I've got a feeling and it's a feeling I don't like and I go after it. But sometimes it's like an awareness. It's an awareness. It's a conscious awareness of, oh, I've dealt with the passing, the miscarriages that I had, and like in my family, generational trauma surrounding child loss. I thought that I had fully processed all of that. But one of the nuggets for me was grief, like the pure grief of it. So I didn't feel the grief. And also was like the sadness, anger, rage. Those were the big things that I was feeling around it, and I hadn't fully felt it or processed it. So I wanted you to understand that there are reasons that we still need to keep doing the trauma work and the emotional work and the mental work, all of it, even when we acknowledge and feel our emotions. You'll notice often there's like a distinct feeling. There are certain emotions that I feel, like frustration is one of them. When I'm frustrated, I feel it and I can acknowledge it and I can move through it really easy because I don't really have a trauma tied to it. I would say sadness, I'm getting to that point. I still think there might be a few little things inside me that have a sadness attached to them that I need to process, but I'm getting more and more comfortable with sitting with sadness. Even fear. In the past, probably 10, 20 years ago, fear, I would have like really rejected fear. But fear doesn't get me anymore. Like fear, I can truthfully say that there might be one fear that I have, and that's like related to bad things happening to my family. That might be the only one. Most other things don't bother me at all from a fear aspect. I don't really have the fear of other things. So most of the time when I feel fear, I'm like, oh, it's fear. That's, I'm getting a little nervous or jittery or there's something that's happening. I feel that fear, but it's not something I can move. I can identify it, sit with it, let it move through it and just let it be. But yeah, when it comes to especially my children and my spouse, that something bad happening to them, really I don't want to even say it's a fear. Like that would just be very hard and very sad. And just, I know everything that would come with that. So I don't even want to call it a fear, but that's, like I said, I'm like, I have come a long way with fear because I think I grew up in an environment where everything was kind of like fear-based and things were fear forward. And so I consciously have moved myself away from that. But in the past, probably 5 or 10 years, I have really been able to process it and move it through my body. So understand that there are going to be times when you do need to do deeper work. Yes, we can use these daily tools. And that's one of my goals, is to give you guys daily tools to be able to handle the ups and downs of daily life. But then there are times when doing the deeper work is appropriate.
If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you. Remember, knowledge is just the beginning. Taking action is what truly sparks change. If you're overwhelmed and don't have enough energy to make it through the day, I invite you to book a free 20-minute coaching call with me. It's a no-obligation chat where we can discuss your health goals and how I might be able to help you achieve them. Visit the link in the episode description to book that call. Until next time, keep striving for wellness, and remember, you have the power to not just survive, but thrive in motherhood.